welcome again to I Helped Make That. Last month, we had Simpsons writer Michael Price to talk about his series F is for Family. Now, we are joined by another Simpsons writer, the legendary Bill Oakley, to talk about a series he made back in the late 90s called Mission Hill. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah, though we're actually not going to talk about the entire series like we did with Michael for F is for Family, but instead we are going to talk about the last episode of the show, Plan 9 from Mission Hill, and what made that episode so special. But before we do that, let's get the anchor ad out of the way. So, Bill, do you have your own podcast?
I do not.
Well, have you ever wanted to create a podcast?
I've definitely been interested in doing it.
What would your podcast be about?
Probably about snack food.
And why snack food?
Just something I'm very interested in talking about. I can go on forever.
Well, if you wanted to create your own podcast, you know what you can use?
What?
Anchor. You know why Anchor?
Why?
Because it is the easiest podcasting platform to use. All you do is sign up for an account, press create episode, record the episode by yourself or with a guest by inviting them to record, and then you can post it on all of the platforms. It's just easy like that.
That does sound incredibly easy. I didn't know there was something like that available.
So everyone, if you want to create your own podcast, use Anchor today. So now, Bill, tell me, before we talk about Mission Hill, you got, I wouldn't say it's your first job, but one of your first jobs was writing on The Simpsons with your frequent writing partner, Josh. How did you get on The Simpsons?
It was a long and complicated journey, but the somewhat short version of it is Josh and I, when I say we throughout this entire thing, it means me and Josh. Josh and I moved to Los Angeles to work on we had originally been working on a cable comedy show in New York, and we got an offer to work on a show in Los Angeles, and we moved to Los Angeles to do it, and it was canceled after 3 weeks, and then we were unemployed for a really long time, and we had basically just about given up when somebody said, why don't you just write one more script for a show that you love? And a show that we loved had just come on the air called The Seinfeld Chronicles. And it had only been on for 4 episodes or whatever. But we loved Seinfeld, and we wrote a spec script for Seinfeld. A spec script is a sample script that you write for a TV show to demonstrate that you can write for someone else's show. And it was really popular, and it got into the hands of Mike Reiss and Al Jean at The Simpsons, who actually, one of them apparently hadn't even heard of Seinfeld at that point. They thought it was good, and they gave us an assignment to write a Simpsons episode. And it was the episode called Marge Gets a Job, which is a story written by Conan O'Brien. And we wrote the script, and they liked it. And subsequently, a few months later, they hired us.
Nice. So you were on The Simpsons, and then years later, you decided to create your own show, which became Mission Hill. What made you decide to start creating your own show with Josh?
The inspiration for Mission Hill was the fact that on The Simpsons, there's almost no characters between the ages of 12 and 30. If you think about it, like Otto is literally the only character. I can't even think of another character there's not a single person between the ages of maybe, like I said, 12 and 30, except for Otto, who's not even that great a character to begin with.
Well, maybe Squeaky Voice Teen, if he counts.
It's time to put away childish things
and become a man.
Okay, you're right. That's 2. Okay, I don't think there's enough material between Otto and the Squeaky Voice Teen to carry a series. But what we decided to do was to make a show that was mostly people in that age group. And so the main characters were a 24-year-old Andy French and his little brother, 17-year-old Kevin French. And we decided we wanted to make a show that was mainly about those worlds and also kind of about the alternative, a little bit more of the what was then called the alternative world, and based on some of what kind of inspired by the underground comics that were really popular in the early 90s, like Optic Nerve and 8 Ball and Buddy Bradley and things like that. We wanted to kind of have a look and feel like that.
All right. So then tell me, how did you get the show sold to the WB?
The WB at that time, we pitched the show to a number of networks, and the place that was the most interested was the WB, who offered us a 13 episode order, basically on the air, which was extremely exciting, because at that time also the WB was kind of desperate to define itself. It had not yet decided that it was going to become the Teenage Girl Network, and that was one of the things that happened during the time. Unfortunately, between the time that we sold the show and the time that we finished animating it, they had become the Teenage Girl Network, and they had become they had all these shows like Buffy and Roswell and Charmed and things like that that had become hugely successful, and our show was this weird odd man out, which they had no place to put. And it's also weird to think that back then it really mattered what time you were on. It did, like, now with shows like, with most shows that people watch on Netflix or whatever, it doesn't matter. There's no time slot, but the time slot was incredibly important back then, because the show was broadcast and that was it. So by the time we got on the WB, they didn't have any place to put us.
Now, for anyone listening to this who might not be aware, when did they usually air the show?
They only aired it 3 times. One time they aired it right after Buffy, and it didn't do well. And then the next time they aired it on Friday night, they had a block of comedy shows that were the Jamie Foxx show and the Steve Harvey show and something else like that. And our show was not compatible. And basically our show was really damaging the ratings of those shows, and they pulled it almost immediately.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That
And then, the show, and as most people know who'll be listening to this, the show then vanished for about 3 years until the Adult Swim was invented. And Adult Swim got hold of Mission Hill and aired it over and over and over for years and years and years, which is where everybody saw it.
And that leads to the episode that we are going to be focusing specifically on today, Plan 9 from Mission Hill, because weirdly, it's technically the series finale, even if it wasn't planned that way. But it's funny because it's an episode about this previously lost media from a show that at one point became in danger of being lost media. So it is kind of a weird life imitates art situation almost. So in this episode, the little brother, Kevin, befriends one of their neighbors, a gay man and cinephile named Wally. They bond over the fact that they love all these high art movies. But then Kevin finds out that Wally had made a movie himself, and it turns out that Wally is embarrassed by the movie because the movie's really, 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 really bad, like Plan 9 or The Room or Manos, the Hands of Fate, something like that. So do you remember what the inspiration for this episode came from?
I think so. I should say that this episode was written by Dan McGrath, and a lot of it was his material, from the get-go. And it might have just been his idea, but I know that what inspired it was this movie called Cinema Paradiso, which was out, and I have not seen the movie, but I believe it was a story similar to this, where a young boy learns to love great film by working at an art house with an older man or something. Cinema Paradiso, and I think it was considered like an art house classic at that time. So the story, at least the launching pad for the story, was that. And then it was Ed Wood, basically, I mean, it was the story of Ed Wood, which also had been a movie around that time, except that Wally made his crappy movie by accident. Mainly, he was blinded by. It turns out he was blinded by love for Gus, and was just trying to get the movie made, as opposed to Ed Wood, who was not necessarily blinded, who wasn't a high art, didn't aspire to high art like Wally did.
One thing that I think a lot of people who might have seen this episode, and one thing that I loved about this episode is the amount of movie geek references, references to just sort of the culture of cinema at the time. Like, even as someone who was a little kid in the 90s / early thousands, I couldn't help but think, oh yeah, that takes me back. Like the vibe that the video store scenes had was very similar to the vibe I remember video stores having at the time.
Hi, Terry. Hey, Ted. What's going on?
Andy, you still owe us a couple of overdue movies.
Or sort of like the references to like Taco Bell tie-ins.
Ratso Rizzo's not the kind of character that looks good on Taco Bell cups.
But as well as, things like, like getting into huge, high art, great films.
What is that stupid black thing? When are we gonna find some aliens?
Whose baby is that? What's going on?
I understand.
Like, as a cinephile, I couldn't help but relate to that. And I think that was one thing that helped me draw me into the story, as well as sort of a love of so bad it's good work that clearly comes from a personal vision, but for whatever reason, it just didn't work.
Sure is scary fishing at night like this, eh, Bill?
You said it, Raymond.
Or Josh or the other writers add in all these like little movie geek references or things like that.
We put in a couple of them, but most of them came from Dan. And many of these things are referencing things I haven't even seen, like these Bergman movies, that the Seventh Seal, and this other one. I'm not sure even which one is it Wild Strawberries that he's parodying with the lawyer Eggerman, like how overwrought it is. Like I've never seen that. 2001. I noticed actually watching this episode that the stuff from 2001 is almost impossible to figure out because the music is not there. I should say, as a sidebar to people, the Mission Hill is very hard to see in its original form. The only way to see it now is on YouTube, but the versions that are on YouTube do not have the original music because Warner Brothers was too cheap. Like, these came from the DVD. Obviously, Warner Brothers was too cheap when they made the DVD to get the original music. So a lot of it has been replaced. And one thing, it's hard to figure without hearing that distinctive music that also sprang Zarathustra from 2001. It's very hard to figure out what's going on in that scene. Anyway, so that's, yes, amongst those things, I think we tossed in things, the other writers tossed in things a bit, but this was really Dan's magnum opus. And he, at least as far as the classic cinema stuff, it all came right out of his computer.
But now let's talk about the other thing that makes this particular episode notable. And I don't know how much this is Dan or if the other writers help contribute to this, which is that, at least for the time, when you consider how other adult animated shows, or just how a lot of other media in general approach the subject, it did have a fairly progressive portrayal of homosexuality.
Well, I don't think we realized this at the time, but Gus and Wally, in the pilot episode, that was the first gay kiss ever broadcast on television. We later found out. And the series won a GLAAD award for its portrayal of Gus and Wally. And yeah, it was. We later found out that, like, a lot of people grew up, this was the first time they'd ever seen a gay couple on television.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if you look at any other adult cartoon around the time, or just, there are even kids cartoons that have done this. Like, they portrayed homosexuality as a joke, something that's gross, or they portray, or you have these adult dramas portraying homosexuality around the time as something that's sort of a tragic thing that could never happen. Like, but this, like, I mean, you think about it, this episode, it came out, well, it was supposed to come out in 2000. It didn't come out until 2002. It was made in 1999. You hope to get it out by 2000. Like, just a few years before it was made, we had Ace Ventura.
Yes.
Like, it is such a hugely different, view of homosexuality from, most of what mainstream media was portraying at the time. And you said you were kind of shocked that it was received so warmly. But how about the other writers? Was it something that was more something they were trying to do, or something that just came by accident?
It was just kind of built into the series. Like, I don't think we realized that it was so that people would consider it so groundbreaking. I think that Gus and Wally were just we thought that I think they were probably everybody's favorite characters to write for. And they were a really well-developed couple of characters, and who had this tumultuous relationship where they'd fight, but then they'd also be really romantic. It was really fun to write for them. And we didn't set out that, we didn't have an agenda when we put them on there. We're just like, this is the kind of couple you'd find in this neighborhood.
I think it also might be something that was just so normal, maybe to you, or because it might also depend on, how do I say this, like, where people grew up.
Yeah.
Like, where were you at the time?
Oh, we were in Los Angeles, so it wasn't unusual to us.
Yeah, but like, it may not have been considered unusual in LA or even Manhattan, but like other parts of New York or other parts of America, it was considered unusual at the time. It's still considered somewhat unusual today. I mean, have you heard about parents freaking out over a same-sex kiss in Lightyear? That's just like,
I just heard about that. Yeah, that's we take it for granted that that kind of thing is normal, and other people in America flip out about it, and continues to. Now, it never fails to surprise me that people haven't kind of caught up.
Yeah, it surprises me too, especially with the whole thing about Roe versus Wade. Like,
right.
If you just lived in New York and never even heard about other states, you wouldn't even think that could ever be a possibility. Or LA. But getting back to Mission Hill, how did you feel when you heard that the show was revived by Adult Swim?
I don't think we even knew it for sure. Like this, people think that we had a relationship with Adult Swim. We never heard from them once. Like, I think what happened was that Warner Brothers, which owned Adult Swim and Cartoon Network, was just like, here's a bunch of canceled shows from our vault that you can put on here for cheap. And so I don't even know that we were told in advance. I think friends of ours might have said, there's this thing that called Adult Swim, and they're airing Mission Hill, and we were like, what? Like, I'm pretty sure that's exactly how it happened.
So that's another case of life imitating art, because remember in the episode, Wally says,
"We got some money by signing away the drive-in rights."
And then I guess that's the only reason it was playing in the theater at the first place, is the studio decided to just dump it in his art house theater.
Right. Well, I think in this case, there's actually probably I think in an earlier draft, it's clear that Wally does not own the theater. Wally is an employee, and there's someone else, the owner of the theater, makes the decisions about what is going to be shown. And that, I think, was cut out for time. A lot of stuff was cut out of this episode for time, because it was too long. And I think that what happened was the theater owner discovered that it was like, oh, look at this crazy drive-in thing that we found. We unearthed this lost film, much to Wally's horror. But now it's not it's not exactly clear how that thing got on their screening schedule.
Yeah, that's actually what I was wondering too. I guess I just assumed, oh, it was this the studio that did it, but you know, sometimes things do have to be rushed for time.
Yeah.
I think we all understand. Like again, the episode doesn't go too deep into exactly why Wally and Gus fell in love.
But there was one thing I hadn't counted on.
But again, time constraints. We
Right.
all understand. But that being said, if you didn't know that it was on Adult Swim until afterwards, what was your reaction when you found out the show did have a bit of a cult following?
I think that it didn't happen all at once. It only became clear over time, because they aired them over and over and over again, as well as Teletoon in Canada also aired them over and over and over. And so it only became clear once things like Twitter were invented in 2008, 2009, that we even heard from people, or we once in a while we run into people. Because we had Josh and I still had our Mission Hill t-shirts, and like you wear your Mission Hill t-shirt, people be like, oh my God, I love that show. So we'd run into people once on the street, or at record stores or whatever, who remember the show. But we didn't realize that there was a fan base really probably until, I don't know, 2011 or something like that, when it became clear from people on YouTube talking about it, and people on Twitter talking about it, and people posting on Tumblr things from it. Like, then it became clear that it did have a following, which we were unaware of.
Yet again, life kind of imitates art. Wally was too embarrassed by the film at first to understand that people were becoming fans of the movie, because he just saw it as this thing from his past that he tried not to think too much about. But then at the end, like, he realizes that it is kind of resonating with people. They are sort of getting really into it.
Oh, that still doesn't make it great.
I'm not so sure.
How many of yous must get blasted before yous will learn? Nuclear weapons is wrong-hearted.
Oh, God, I haven't laughed this hard in years. When I get home, I'm flushing all my Prozac down the sink.
The guy who found this movie deserves a medal.
Found it? How about the guy who made it?
Oh, brother.
I should say also, that's another film reference. It's this, there's Preston Sturges. There's a reference amongst the film geek stuff in there. There is a Preston Sturges movie parody. And this whole ending of this thing is taken from the movie Sullivan's Travels, which is a Preston Sturges movie too, where a movie director, the story is the movie director basically decides he's not doing enough to help Americans. And then and then at the end, after his miserable journey, he discovers that people are watching his films and laughing and enjoying and getting a break from their hard lives for an hour and a half. And it's kind of the same ending here that was also taken as an homage to the Preston Sturges film.
In general, not only does this have, a really great progressive message.
Oh, look at that. The squad cars are going backwards. Lordy, what was I thinking?
Maybe you were thinking about how far you'd go for Gus. You're the one who taught me that all great movies have a personal vision. Wally, this whole movie is your Valentine to Gus. It couldn't be any more personal.
For its time, or at least a great progressive portrayal for its time, but just has sort of a great message on how cinema can help unite people and bring them together, even in ways that you may not have expected. But it also shows that, that hardly anyone ever really sets out to make a bad movie, and you kind of understand exactly why Wally's movie came out the way it did, but also sort of shows that there's always a story behind any movie or any TV show that's usually made by people just trying to do the best they can with
Right, right.
with the circumstances they are given.
People of Earth, I greet yous from the Galactic Federation.
Walter, I admire your picture, I do. But really, I simply can't tolerate bad acting. It's either me or that damn dirty ape. I like the sound of that. With my other star gone, the financing collapsed. I had to shoot in cheaper digs across town. And I made more casting changes. Well, we'll make this work somehow. Action!
For eons, we have observed you. Wally, I can't say this stuff.
Yeah, it's too hard.
Well, we'll just have to change the story and rewrite the script.
I will blast you with this here ray. Wally, am I supposed to be mad or not?
He always looks mad. You can never tell the difference.
We'll put a light bulb on his chest. Then when it lights up, we'll know he's mad. Guys, he just shot you. Hey, your bulb is on. You're angry.
Oh, yeah? Lot of things. Very dangerous things.
So, what do you think? Kid, I'll give it to you straight. You're through.
And that's actually kind of why I started this show, just to give out those stories to the world instead of being yet another show that's just talking about movies made by people who don't really understand how movies are even made necessarily. You see it all the time. I don't know if you're really aware of this, culture, but there are people on the internet going just they put no effort into it.
Right,
How could this movie happen? Blah, 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 blah. And it gets a little tiring after a while. So instead of, just being that kind of,
Right.
show, no, I wanted to sit down and interview people to see exactly how these movies and TV shows were made, from their perspective. Now, do you know if maybe Dan sort of had a similar view? He wanted to really show a bit more how a bad movie could come to be, or
Oh yeah, I think that was. I mean, and that's part of the brilliance of his script here was that it makes it completely believable. It's completely believable the way that Wally's movie fell apart, and it's completely believable that Wally tried to salvage it every way that he could, with the limited funding he had, and why it eventually came out to be such an embarrassment. But I think that's part of the architecture of Dan's script is that you really feel for Wally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, that's another thing that also, to tie back to the homosexuality aspect, makes it great. And is that Wally and Gus aren't just gay. They're not just the gay characters. There's more to them than that. And if you look at a lot of portrayals of gay people on other adult animated comedies, gay was pretty much their one and only personality trait. But no, here there's, they're people first and who just happen to be gay. Doesn't even really make many, at least this episode. I'd have to go back to the whole series to think about this, but this episode definitely doesn't really even make that many jokes about it. It just presents them as is.
I think there's one or two jokes, which is when they're first dating. The cops are after them. The cops, with their holding hands, skipping through the park, the cops are after them. There's one or two jokes like that, but that's that was 1958, so that's, it's very believable that would have been the case.
Yeah.
But you're right.
Yeah. Like I said, and again, the joke is on the cops, not on them.
Right.
Now, that all being said, I heard that you were considering bringing back the show, but focusing on Wally and Gus.
Yes, I don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately, though, because right now we're having the animation, streaming animation, in places like Netflix and HBO Max are all kind of having a really hard time and collapsing to some extent. So they're not seeking out shows like Gus and Wally. They're seeking, if anything, they're seeking out more shows that are like, about like sassy kids or whatever. They're like, South Park style shows. So they're not like, this show is most likely not going to happen, unfortunately. But there'll probably be there may be some other life for it, because we're trying to get the rights to these characters to to exploit them in some other vein, like do a Gus and Wally comic book, for instance.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, best of luck with that. Break a leg with that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. But do you have anything else to promote?
I have an audiobook coming out on audible.com. And it's not necessarily a book. It's kind of more like a radio show called Space 1969. And it stars Natasha Lyonne. And it is a retro sci-fi comedy about what America is like in 1969 if Kennedy had survived the assassination and decided to go full bore into this, and Vietnam, and go full bore into the space race. And we now have a space colony, and we have a space station. And Natasha Lyonne stars as a night nurse on the space station who gets drawn into a galactic conspiracy involving both JFK and Richard Nixon. It's definitely something that I'm very proud of, and I think it's quite funny, at least if you like the kind of stuff I write. I think you'll agree. So check it out, Space 1969 on audible.com.
All right. Anyway, I think that's it for today. That was I Helped Make That. Have a great day, everyone.
What the? Will you look at that? Oh, Gus.